to tonight's event for Fuel Your Body. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I just have a quick presentation for you guys as we get into this event. Great. Is everybody able to see my slides?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Great. So hi, everyone. Like Soma said, my name is Daniela. I'm currently a second-year osteopathic medical student at NYIT. I am very passionate about nutrition and food accessibility for lower income patients. And so I'm here to talk today about nutrition and mindful eating, especially in the month of January, as you know, a lot of people are setting New Year's resolutions. This is a popular topic to discuss as we kind of think about the ways that we approach food and just how to have a healthy mindset about eating. So what we'll be talking about today, just in general, before we get started, I just want to give a quick disclaimer. I am not the all-knowing being when it comes to nutrition. So this presentation really is just here to act as a guideline for your own personal knowledge and edification about nutrition. And so I really encourage you to do your own research after this presentation, just to see what works for you and just to learn a little bit more about what goes into your body. So we'll be starting off to talk about what goes in your food, all of the different components of healthy eating. And then we'll also discuss just the mindset of kind of looking at popular diets and what's true, what's false, and then also how to set personal healthy eating goals. And we'll also have time for questions in between. All right, so just a little bit of background on your body. So the average human body is made up of 3 trillion cells. So each one serves unique purposes and all require various nutrients. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is later. And as an osteopathic physician student, I love to really promote our philosophy, which is that the body works together as a unit. So human bodies are more than the sum of their parts. All the systems work together. And so I have a couple examples for you guys before we dive into more of the nutrition side of things. So for people who are familiar with the substance serotonin, it is kind of like what a lot of people call the happy chemical. It helps regulate our mood and often is brought up when folks face mood disorders like depression or anxiety. And so does anybody have any guesses as to where most of our serotonin is produced in the body?
It'd either be the brain or the gut.
I'm going to guess the gut too.
All right, so 2 guesses for the gut.
I would say the brain, but now I'm thinking maybe it's the gut.
Slide kind of gives it away. So yeah, for the folks who answered the gut. Oh, sorry, did I cut someone off? So yeah, for the folks who said gut, you would be correct. So currently the studies show that about 90 to almost 95% of your serotonin is created in your gut. So for people who have healthy gut bacteria, that actually really promotes healthy levels of serotonin release into your body. So when you eat better, you mentally feel better, and the science proves it. And another example that I'll give you also is related to 2 different systems that you may not think about working together, but actually do. So your lungs actually create something called ACE, which is a hormone that regulates your blood pressure. But what a lot of people may not think about when they think about blood pressure is that the kidneys actually get affected by that too. When your kidneys have blood flow that goes through it more quickly or more slowly, that'll also affect how much of your fluids get filtered out. And so if your lungs are healthy, that can also really help your kidney health too. And the last thing that I want to talk about is compensation. So our bodies, because they do work together, they often tend to compensate for things that aren't working as well. A common example I can give is probably if you've ever stubbed your toe, you're probably going to lean a lot more on the foot that wasn't affected. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about how food kind of relates to these systems working together. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit and break down kind of like the science behind nutrition and all of the different nutrients that your body needs. If you look on the right side, you'll see a nutrition label. You've probably seen this on a lot of different foods. They've recently updated it so that the Numbers of the calories are a lot easier to see. The serving sizes have also been adjusted based off of previous research about what's the healthy amount of a serving based off of different foods. And they've also added a couple lines like the added sugar line. So that's actually been really helpful.
So I have a question on that because it's saying that 10 grams of added sugar is 20% of the daily value that you're supposed to have. And I had read that it was like 25 grams for a female and 35 or something for a male. So that seems off.
Yeah, so this definitely is, like the daily recommended for a typical person. And when they say typical person, that normally means like a 6-foot Caucasian male who weighs about like 180, 200 pounds. And that doesn't necessarily apply to all of the folks in here. And so it definitely, kind of varies depending on your dietary needs. And we're actually going to talk a little bit later about how to kind of figure out how much your body specifically needs. That's a really good point, Athena. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the main components. The two categories that we have up on this presentation currently are macronutrients, which you think about your carbs, fat, protein, and some people may not think about it, fiber and water also being macronutrients, but a lot of health studies have kind of put that into the same category too. And then also our micronutrients, which are vitamins and minerals. All right, so let's talk about carbs first. I know that popular media loves to demonize carbs because of people thinking like, well, if I eat carbs, I might gain weight. And so I do want to clarify that carbohydrates are not bad for you. We're going to talk a little bit more about food neutrality later, but you do need carbohydrates to survive. It's one of the quickest ways your body can get energy. And I think for a lot of folks, the difference might be in looking at complex carbs versus simple carbs. So when we talk about complex carbs, we're talking about ones that are higher in fiber, digest more slowly, and are really good for blood sugar controls. So the examples that I gave here, including whole grains, beans, potatoes, oatmeals, those would all be considered complex carbs. Versus simple carbs, those will digest more quickly, will spike your blood sugar, and probably will make you feel more hungry after you've eaten them. So that includes kind of your typical idea of sugars, so like white sugar syrup, honey, and fruits would actually also fall under that category. The next thing we'll talk about is fat. So fat, of course, has been also kind of given a bad rep in popular media, but we do need it for long-term energy, also for the cushioning of our body, as well as cell membranes. The main thing that we want to talk about are different types of fats. So the way that fats get categorized when we look at them on a nutrition label are due to the difference in chain length and degree of saturation. So I'm sure for the folks who maybe had like a background in chemistry, that figure on the right may scare you a little bit, but it's just basically talking about how the different carbon molecules get saturated, and the ones that are less saturated are actually better for you. And so as you can see, the saturated examples I gave were like meat and butter, and that currently is most closely linked with heart disease. I bolded monounsaturated because when we talk about healthy fats, those are normally the ones that we're referring to, the ones that you can find in nuts, seeds, avocados, and just more plant-based fats. The polyunsaturated fats, we would think about like more processed fats. So those would be veg oils, and those are the ones that have been mechanically unsaturated and can be worse than the naturally unsaturated fats like nuts and seeds. And the last one here is trans fats, which I think maybe like 10, 15 years ago had this huge thing where they pretty much like banned trans fats, and that's often found in vegetable shortening. The other component of fat is just fatty acids. And so the ones that we typically really promote getting a lot of are omega-6s and omega-3s. Currently, it's noted that a typical American diet actually has too much omega-6, which can also be linked to heart disease. So definitely thinking about when incorporating fats into your diet, trying to find omega-3 rich foods is definitely better. So avocados, nut seeds, and fish oil. The third macronutrient I want to talk about is protein. So those are like your main building blocks of your cells. These are the best macronutrient to keep you full. And the main thing that you want to look for when you're eating proteins are what we call quote unquote complete proteins. And the reason why they're called complete is because they have these components called amino acids, and they're the ones that have all of the 9 essential amino acids that your body needs to function. So the examples I gave here are mostly meats, eggs, for the folks who follow a plant-based diet, soy, quinoa, buckwheat, chia, hemp seed, and beans and rice. All right, so for fiber. So fiber is kind of like the hidden macronutrient. It's an insoluble thing that we can only find in plants. The body can't digest it, which means that it creates a gel with your gastric fluids and the water that you drink in order to allow for better bowel movements and GI health. Unfortunately, with the way that America processes their food and also the nature of our agriculture, we are a pretty fiber deficient country. And so trying to find higher fiber foods is a pretty tough challenge, but I don't think people would ever say like, oh, I'm getting too much fiber, unless of course they're taking like huge fiber supplements or like eating those fiber one bars like candy bars. So the things that you would find in fiber-rich foods would include like dark leafy greens, broccoli, apples, potatoes with the skin, and whole grains. So if you're thinking about getting fiber-rich foods, things with the skin on will give you more fiber. We have seen data that shows more fiber intake does lead to reduced risk of GI issues, which I mentioned earlier is also linked to your mental health, heart disease, obesity, and cancer. And the current daily recommendation is 28 grams for women, 35 for men. All right, sugar. So sugar is not a macronutrient, but I want to talk a little bit about it now because when we're looking at nutrition labels, it can be really difficult to figure out what sugar is really doing to your body. And so talking a little bit about how it's processed in the body, when sugar gets digested in your GI tract, your body releases something called insulin. And that insulin helps your sugar get taken up into the bloodstream and then regulate the distribution of that sugar. Some foods, because of the way that the sugar is kind of packaged and the ways the molecules look, will get absorbed a lot faster and create a larger insulin spike. And for folks with diabetes, this can create a huge issue because it could trigger, diabetic symptoms. And for folks who aren't diabetic, this can also create feelings of hunger or craving more sweet foods after you've eaten these things. So one thing that I want to introduce you guys, which you may already know about, is the glycemic index, which tells you how much the food affects your blood sugar levels. And so you want to look for things that have a lower glycemic index. That means that it's going to have a slower absorption into your body and will create a smaller spike in your insulin.
And also, it's not just the food, it's how ripe it is. Like bananas, if they're yellow, have way higher glycemic index than when they're green.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't think a lot of folks know that. So that's a really helpful tip. And so another thing that I want to point out is that sugars are the same. So if folks say like, oh, I'm eating like healthy sugars like honey and agave, like they're still technically sugar. And so they're still going to affect your insulin levels. But the caveat is, what does the sugar come packaged in? For example, I mentioned earlier that fruits are simple carbohydrates, but they also have higher water content that may be like a donut or a candy bar, and also a lot more fiber. And so that can help with the slower digestion and aid in that insulin spike too. When looking at nutrition labels, definitely look at your added amounts of sugar. Of course, you can't like extract the sugar out of a fruit and then eat the non-sugary parts. So if you can look at foods that do have a lot more added sugars, maybe switching them out to ones with less added sugars would be best. And then for a quick question, as we get into the next section, sugar versus fat, which one do you think affects your weight more?
Sugar. Well, depending on what kind of fat again, but in general, sugar.
I'm going to go with sugar.
All right, so 2 votes for sugar. You guys would both be correct. There is actually an interesting study that one of my colleagues at Hopkins sent me that the sugar industry actually funded a study that antagonized fat in the 80s, which is why a lot of diets at the time came out with low fat options. And a lot of the low fat foods that hit the market were actually supplemented with sugar to make them taste better. When in reality, fat, of course, like Athena mentioned earlier, it depends on the type that you're eating, but fat is known to cause a slower spike in your insulin, also keeps you fuller longer, which means that you're probably going to eat smaller portions and also won't create those cravings later on. And so sugar can definitely affect your weight more.
There's a book by Dr. Mark Hyman called Eat Fat, Get Thin. And it kind of worked for me, I have to say.
Awesome. Yeah. So the next thing we'll talk about real
How
quick.
do you get around, I'm sorry to interrupt, how do you go, how do you get around, I guess, the sugar issue when just about everything has sugar in it? Like, you know, I mean, like, even if minute amounts, I mean, it's like the same thing, it's just like everything with like sugar and salt, like this, at least with American food, everything has sugar and everything has salt. So it's like, how do you get around it as far as making better choices?
That's a great question, Lakeisha. I think that our country is a very like sugar obsessed place. I think Athena is holding up.
I'm showing what I ate for lunch today. It was a huge amount of food, and it's what I eat every day. And I eat no processed foods to speak of. I did have taco shell steaks. I couldn't get lettuce on Instacart for some reason, but it's like I eat close to 30 plant products in one meal, which is like pretty unheard of, but it's a ton of vegetables and a ton of fruits and nuts and seeds. So I've read dozens of books on nutrition, and I compiled them all together to figure out what I should be eating every day. And I actually made a Google spreadsheet to track all of those foods every day on my phone. I like check off, ate a carrot, ate a beet, ate a this, ate a that, ate a whatever. And it's actually fun for me. It might not be fun for everybody, but I've actually had fun doing it. I started doing it in June.
That's incredible. I'm sure it takes a lot of discipline to look through and do the research. And being able to share that knowledge with others is great. So thank you so much, Athena. But like going back to the question about avoiding sugars, it can be really difficult, especially with how sugar is pretty much found in anything. Like you can find it in pasta sauce, you can find it in just like random things that you might not even think would need sugar, but they add it. One thing that I do recommend, because a lot of grocery stores are kind of going towards like what they would call like the natural versions of their foods. Like I've seen, like for example, I think Smucker's or Jif does like a natural brand of their peanut butter where it's just like the peanuts and salt and a little bit of oil. So then it doesn't have like the added sugars. So looking for those brands, if they have like a version that's kind of like quote unquote natural, it may mean that they don't have added sugar. But another option is just to like create your own at home, where you could maybe like find a recipe for a pasta sauce and make a big batch of that. Pasta sauce keeps really well, so you can make like a huge pot and then store it for later, and that way you have like your sugar-free version.
It sticks to your pasta much better too. If you use like a pizza sauce as a base instead of a pasta sauce, not that there's not sugar in pizza sauce, but just making your own, you have control over it, and then it's not as messy, frankly, I found.
Definitely. And we'll talk a little bit about this later as we're discussing just kind of like mindset towards eating. But of course, like when we're in a culture where so many things have added sugar, it is great and it is achievable to avoid all added sugar. But for a lot of folks, depending on their lifestyle or how much time they have to dedicate to their diet, that's not necessarily feasible. And so it's just more about moderation and control of how much sugar that you are taking in. So if you decide that you want to have a sweet treat, great. But at the same time, like just thinking about what are the other things in your diet that kind of help balance that out.
I'll make another recommendation on books, or at least read a summary of it on Google. It's Eat to Beat Disease. And it goes over the 5 ways of trying to keep disease at bay. And in one part of the book, it has what's called grand slammers that hit on all 5 of those. And you'll be happy to know that dark chocolate is one of them. So I had dark chocolate right before coming down here.
Awesome. We love to have
And
flexibility.
his name is Dr. Lee. And he talks about how you don't want to think about what to take out of your diet so much as what to put into your diet. Because once you're eating, like if you made that Google sheet like I did, and you're eating all that food, you're not hungry for anything else. So it really helps.
Definitely. Adina actually touched on a great point that I wanted to share later, which is like thinking about what you can add versus what you can take out. And that's a really great mindset to think about when you're trying to adjust your nutritional needs. And so just going back to the presentation, we can talk a little bit more about micronutrients. So for the folks who see the term essential, what does it mean when something is essential? Does anybody have any guesses?
You're going to get sick if you don't have it.
Definitely. Any other comments?
It's something that's critical.
Definitely, yeah. So in the medical field, when we talk about essential versus non-essential nutrients, essential just basically means that your body can't create it itself. So you need to get it from your food. And so, like Athena mentioned earlier, you know, if you're not getting enough from your diet, it can cause a lot of health issues. And so the ones that are what we would call non-essential are vitamins B7 and K, which are made by your intestinal bacteria, again, going back to gut health, and then vitamin D, which is made in the skin when exposed to UV light. But unfortunately, especially with the way that things have been going with COVID, we're kind of cooped up inside. A lot of folks haven't been getting enough vitamin D, especially in the winter months. So supplementing is definitely an option there.
So why is D and K and B, they're all listed as essential and non-essential?
So the different types of B vitamins, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, there's
like
kind of
B12
subcategories.
you have to get from food, for example.
Exactly.
There's like K3 or K2 or whatever. Okay.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't mention the specific numbers of the B and K vitamins, but I think if you do like a quick search of essential vitamins, it'll show you specifically which ones are the ones you need to get from your diet. All right. And then for minerals, we have a long list here, but these are all the ones that your body needs for proper muscle function, especially for cell communication and new cell growth. So at this point, it might feel a little overwhelming. We've kind of like broken down a lot of the major components of a typical nutrition label. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to share at this time.
Daniela, hi, my name's Lisa. So when you talk about sugar, I just told my family I'm pretty sure I'm addicted to sugar, and just trying to figure out the best way to handle that. I mean, I've done it before where I can cut it out or I can really tune it down. But I think through this pandemic, I was into comfort foods for a while, which turned into like this sugar addiction. If I don't get sugar, I just start craving it. So do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lisa. I think the pandemic has definitely affected a lot of people's kind of approach towards nutrition. We all have been facing a lot of different challenges in the past year or so. So that's definitely really valid. And so I appreciate you sharing that. I think when it comes to sugar, what I've noticed when, you know, you have an addictive substance, cutting it out cold turkey can be really painful and often means that you're probably going to try to go back to it later. And so I think a more stepwise way of approaching it would be best. So like, for example, if you find yourself that you're eating like 2 to 3 desserts a day, just giving an example, maybe cutting it down to like 1 dessert a day and then moving from 1 dessert every week and then kind of moving towards different options for your sugar. So just kind of thinking about like, where are you mostly getting your sugar from? Like, for example, I know that my family is a big bread family. My dad loves making bread at home, and we definitely profited off of that during the pandemic. But like, just kind of thinking about ways to implement maybe like more whole grains, things that will keep you more full and more satiated. Trying to think of other kind of ways to think about it.
I have no idea if this would work. I haven't researched this at all, but my son is real into matcha tea and gave me matcha tea for Christmas. And that crosses over the brain border, you know, goes into your brain. And I very quickly had more energy, at the same time a sense of calm, which is very weird to me. I didn't think that would be possible. But I'm guessing maybe because it gives you more energy, you might not have the physiological drive to have sugar, because sugar is really like your body wanting energy. So you might want to try some matcha tea and just see if it helps. And you want like the real matcha tea. I've been using like
what
the
is that?
matcha tea bags. Those are not going to do it. You want the matcha tea powder, and it's not cheap. It's like $35 for a little tin, but it goes a long way.
Can you spell that?
Yeah, MATCHA, like match with an A at the end. Matcha tea.
Thank you.
It doesn't taste good, I'm going to tell you right now.
Oh, God.
But you only need 70 milliliters. It's like a very small amount of water with the matcha tea, and I just like guzzle it down really quick and I'm done. And then I chase it with some regular tea.
Okay.
It's worth a
I
try.
have a question for you. For Danielle, Daniela, can you tell, what are your thoughts about like the keto diet and, you know, where you're kind of starving your body on certain things for a small period of time, and then I'm always very hesitant about something like that. But I was curious your point of view.
Yeah, was that Holly asking the question?
Yes, Holly Schatz.
Great. Thank you for that question, Holly. You actually read my mind. I was going to mention keto later, but I can definitely talk about it now. Keto's kind of hit the news pretty hard and fast with a lot of folks who want to lose weight and just feel like they can't really find a way to. And so keto, for those of you who don't know, is basically a type of restriction diet where you're really only getting your nutrition from proteins and fats and basically cutting out almost all carbohydrates. And what that does is that when your body isn't able to get carbohydrates as its first line of energy, it'll switch over into a state of ketosis, which basically means that your body's going to be breaking down the components of the food differently, and it does help with weight loss. For the folks that I guess like have really praised keto, I definitely respect it and honor that it is a valid way of weight loss. However, the history behind keto is that it was actually developed for children with epileptic disorders. And so it was actually created as a diet to help prevent a specific type of disease, not specifically for weight loss. It was never designed for long-term use either. And the studies are actually showing that folks who do stick to a keto diet for too long can actually cause a lot of heart issues. It could send them into arrhythmias, meaning that when your heart beats, it doesn't beat in a correct rhythm, so the blood it doesn't pump as efficiently. So just thinking about kind of like the pros versus cons, like yes, keto will work because that's kind of what your body's designed to do is in starvation conditions. But at the same time, just thinking about the lack of data that we currently have on keto about how it can really affect the body in the long term, I would definitely be wary about it and just talk to your doctor to see what the best option is for you.
Yeah, I've read a lot about the keto diet, and I don't think it's safe myself. But there is what I think is a safe way of going into ketosis is to actually fast. I fast for at least 16 hours every day. So I have an app on my phone, and I press when I'm done with dinner, and then I don't eat at least for 16 hours on the next day. And that is actually supposed to be one of the key ways of keeping Alzheimer's at bay, which is the reason that I started doing that, because my father died with Alzheimer's at age almost 91. So I like read up a bunch of books on Alzheimer's, but that I haven't heard anything but good things about fasting for 16 hours, say. I've not read of any negative effects of that, where the keto diet has a ton of negative effects.
Yeah. What I like to just generally recommend to friends and you guys alike is that when you look at a diet itself, if you were to quote unquote add it to a normal diet, would it still be healthy? Like some of the things that I've seen people do, especially like influencers who may not have like a nutrition degree or background in healthcare sciences, is that they'll show the things that they're eating on keto, and it can be really harmful because they're really high in saturated fats, like I mentioned earlier, can be linked to heart disease, and also really, really high amounts of protein. When your body doesn't process that properly, it can actually cause kidney stones. So I'm just thinking about like, you know, if I was eating this like with a quote unquote normal meal, like with carbs and other fruits and veggies, would it still be considered healthy? That's a great question, Holly.
Oh, and for Lisa, I also wanted to quickly say, don't have any diet sodas or diet foods, because I learned a few months ago that your brain senses those diet foods as having sugar. And then when it doesn't get the payoff that it's expecting, then it really kind of like boomerangs back at you, and then you're really going to want to crave sugary foods.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Great, great questions coming from everyone. Does anybody have anything else before we move on? Alrighty. So the next part of my presentation just talks a little bit more about our approach towards eating. I know that it can be really difficult starting on a journey of healthy eating or setting different goals for yourself when we don't have necessarily a healthy relationship with food. And so just kind of thinking about the ways that we talk about ourselves and our body, as well as the ways that we think about food, can really drastically affect the way that we are able to stick to different diet plans. And so a couple affirmations that I want to give you guys as you're starting or continuing on your healthy eating journey is that no food is inherently good or bad. They all serve different purposes. And so what I like to call this is just food neutrality, just kind of thinking about the ways that food will affect your body. And if that's the goal you have for it currently, great, eat more of it. But if it's not going to serve you in the way that you want it to, then maybe adjust and find ways to kind of change it across your needs. And of course, your needs change across your lives, and so should your diet. So you don't have to feel like you have to stick to the same thing all the time. Another thing is that I want to affirm you guys in is that you deserve to eat every day. I know that for folks who kind of have been in negative relationships with food, you can feel like, oh, well, if I ate X, Y, and Z, then I don't really deserve to eat this thing. Well, in reality, food is created for you to survive and for you to be able to thrive under, any kind of circumstance. So you definitely deserve to eat every day. Food is also not a punishment or reward. What one of my friends told me, and that this really stuck with me when it came to exercise, is that she told me exercise should be a way to celebrate what your body what it can do, not to punish it for what it's previously done. And so I really like that mindset because it kind of helps you think about the ways that you can really elevate the way you experience your body and have a relationship with it rather than punishing it for previous behavior. Another thing I like to say is eat to live, don't live to eat. Try to find foods that really nourish your body to help you do more of what you want to do, but don't make your life centered around eating. And definitely try to choose wellness over restriction. We kind of mentioned earlier how we want to find ways to add more of the things that make you feel good, and rather than trying to restrict all of the things that you feel like are quote unquote bad. And I did leave a link here for 30 positive affirmations for healthy eating, both before you start cooking or while you're eating. And I can send these slides out later afterwards so you can take a look at the link. And so at this point, you might be thinking well, Danielle, where do I start? There's so much information out there. How do I figure out what's right, what's wrong? One thing that I would just say is just kind of sit down with yourself and ask, what is one goal you have for your body this year that is not about weight? Of course, weight loss can be really beneficial for folks depending on what health conditions you may have, but just thinking about the things that your body can do beyond how much it looks on the scale, and what kind of goals you have for yourself. So for example, being able to walk a mile or getting better sleep. And these are all linked to the food that you put in your body. The second point I already kind of touched on. And the third one is just chunking that one large goal into smaller goals. So definitely be patient with your timeline. I do like to tell folks that we're trying to operate with normal efficiency under very abnormal circumstances. And I think it's kind of absurd. So try to be patient with yourself when a lot of things in this world are demanding the same amount of effort as they would be even if we weren't in a pandemic. So trying to create more feasible goals to celebrate those small steps towards your larger goal will help you stick to that more effectively than trying to reach that one large goal in one fell swoop.
There's a book on that too called Mini Habits for Weight Loss. So for anybody who wants to check that out, it talks about having goals that take no more than 1 minute and have only 5 of them a day, so that every single day you are accomplishing all 5 goals.
I love it. Yeah. And that's actually a fun technique that we use at school too, especially with all the studying that students have to do, is trying to create one easy task that you can do first thing in the morning, maybe just even making yourself a cup of tea or making your bed. And that's kind of going to set your day into motion. So these are just general guidelines. Again, not cut and dry, not the only thing that you should be following, but just a way to kind of kickstart your health journey. So try to find what works for you. Ultimately, you want to enjoy the journey. So give yourself time to adjust to a new dietary pattern. Physiologically, our bodies adjust to a new diet on average about 4 to 6 weeks. And so you want to find time for you to just kind of like really listen to your body and see how it's being affected. I also apologize in advance. Since I live near New York City, I have a train coming by. So if you hear any noise in the back, that's me. Another thing is the 80-20 rule. So if you eat, for example, 3 meals a day, 21 a week, try to make 80 of those healthier options, 20% treat yourself. And then think about what colors are on your plate. Try to aim for one food that is naturally green, one that's naturally red or orange, and then one brown. Another one is the one more, one less rule for a week. Notice how your body feels. So for example, more leafy greens and then less soda, or more complex carbs, less simple carbs. And then another option for folks who do like to journal is journaling your food is really nice, because sometimes, when you're going through the motions of a day, you might not really be thinking about what you're eating, and getting like 5 to 10 minutes, just sit down and think about, what have I eaten today? How much of it did I generally eat? Gives you an idea of how your body might feel in response to that. All right, and so talking a little bit more about accessibility to healthier foods, we all kind of know that healthy foods can be pretty inaccessible depending where you go. Like, unfortunately, our country does have a lot of issues with food deserts, and the ways that we approach food eating is really unfortunate. So I, in the medical field, am a huge advocate for creating more equity across the board when it comes to healthier food access. So a couple of things that you can maybe do just in your daily life is just checking your local store restock dates, just seeing when they get their produce in, so that way you can have like the first pick, so to say, of your produce, your fruits and veggies. Another option is your frozen fruits. So some might not know, but your frozen foods are actually preserved at peak freshness, and that oftentimes means that, with the frozen state that they're in, the enzymes aren't really breaking it down as much. And so those frozen foods can actually be healthier than some of the fresh produce that might have been sitting on your grocery counter for a really long time. It can also help lower costs and saves prep time for folks who need a quick meal to put together. Another option are grocery subscriptions. I've seen a couple floating around online where they'll basically take like overstock or kind of like funky looking aesthetically foods, but still like perfectly fine tasting. And they'll package it all into like a weekly subscription and send it to you. And that's a great option. So for folks who want to maybe try different fruits and vegetables, but don't really know where to start, this is a cheaper option, because these fruits and veggies would get thrown out anyways as food waste, but they're trying to limit that and will also give you food for cheaper. Another option would be to check out your local food banks, community kitchens, see what they're working with each week, and if possible, like being able to volunteer or donate yourself, just thinking about like, what are the foods that I would typically want to put in my body, and then what foods would I like to share with others?
I'll give another.
Daniela? Oh, I apologize. It's Lisa again. Go back to the frozen foods. I've heard that sometimes the nutrients are better when they're frozen. How do you determine what is better, if it's frozen or if it's fresh?
That's a great question. It's kind of hard when you're, just at the grocery store and want to get your groceries, but I would say just taking a look at the general color and the texture of your produce. So if you notice that like the greens have like kind of wilted, or like have kind of like more brown spots, that means it might be more on the end of its life. That also means that the enzymes naturally in the plant are breaking the plant down, because it's no longer, attached to its roots. And so just kind of taking a general look at that.
And where it's coming from, and the distance of where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you can see something's coming from across the country, if it's fresh, it's probably not as good as something that's frozen because it's immediately frozen and it locks it in whatever the place was where it was picked. But if you go to a food market locally, now's not the season for that, at least not here in Maryland. But, farmers markets will probably be better than frozen foods typically.
Yeah, buy local if your budget allows, definitely is a great way to find healthier foods. And also because they are local, your foods are going to be grown in its like natural environment instead of like in a greenhouse. So that also is a great benefit. And also just supporting your local businesses. We all know that's great during these times.
And I was going to give a tip on grocery subscriptions, reminded me of Instacart. So I started shopping online due to the pandemic. My husband actually had COVID in March, and so we were quarantined here. And I have found that we eat so much healthier and we save so much money shopping on Instacart. Even though we pay the $99 annual fee, we are not buying all the expensive processed foods because we're not walking down aisles and seeing that. I just type in whatever it is that's on my list, and then I'm done with it. And so we're just getting healthy foods put into our house. It's what you put into your house is what you're probably going to put into your body. So if you keep that stuff out of your vision, it'll be much better for you, in my view.
Definitely.
No pun intended on, in my view.
I know I'm the type of person, if it's in front of me, I'll taste it. So like my roommate kind of has the same thing. So we'll like hide each other's snacks and then we'll like give them out like at the end of a study day to just kind of like be able to relax and treat ourselves. Great. And so this is the website that I mentioned earlier about how to kind of figure out how much your body may need per day. Of course, this is dependent on your own dietary needs. So it's best to discuss this either with a nutritionist or your physician. And for me personally, for example, like I can't have dairy, that would just like ruin me. So I just kind of ignore that category and try to replace it with more calcium and vitamin D rich foods. But definitely check out MyPlateGov because it actually allows you to put in your lifestyle, what goals you have currently for your eating, and then also like what you're currently eating now. And then they'll give you suggestions to kind of move forward from there. All right, so we mentioned a little bit earlier that, there's a lot of diets out there, like what's really true, what's not. We talked a little bit about keto already. And then I think Athena had mentioned earlier about intermittent fasting. This is really helpful for blood sugar regulation as well. Just keeps you really just kind of in more of a state of ketosis, but in a more, I guess, sustainable way because you're not doing it strictly with fats and proteins. And I would just say, like, if you decide to do intermittent fasting, just try to be mindful of what you eat during the window because that's just as important as when you eat. And studies currently on intermittent fasting have not included the elderly. They've basically been saying that it's really healthy for younger to middle-aged adults, but they haven't really done much beyond that. And it can also be dangerous if you are fasting and taking certain medications. So please, if you are on a medication regimen, do talk to your doctor and make sure that you're following that and that if you're fasting, that it is compatible with it. Another common diet that is out there is Weight Watchers, where they'll allot points to different types of food. And then that way you can track what kind of foods you're allowed to have per day and how many points are allotted per week. This is meant for sustained weight loss, but unfortunately with the point system, it may cause, this good versus bad food mindset that we mentioned earlier. And so just making sure that like you're being mindful if you decide to start this diet is that, ultimately at the end of the day, yes, some foods will have more points than others, but they're not inherently good or bad. They just serve different purposes. And also just kind of like as a caveat for like paid programs, ultimately they want you to stay in the program because they want your money. So just think about that and just being mindful of your goals outside of what you're paying for. All right, so this is my summary, just kind of talking a little bit more about defining your goals, mending or improving your relationship with food. But ultimately, I want you guys to get creative with the way that you approach your food. Enjoy the process. This isn't supposed to be something where you start a diet and leave it as soon as you've reached your weight goals. Ultimately, we want to create a lifestyle that is sustainable and celebrates the way that your body can really survive and thrive under any circumstance. So I hope that this presentation was helpful for you guys, and I will take any questions at this time.
I have a comment
This
for
is
you.
Keisha.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And Daniela, this is Keisha.
Go ahead.
I'm sure, as you know, as well as everyone else, that there's a big push about veganism. So I guess what's your stance on that? Is it like necessary? You know, it kind of taps into the whole good thing, bad thing. So what's your stance on that?
Yeah, so I would say from a medical perspective, more plants in your diet, the better. But when it comes to restriction, accessibility, I think that it can be really harmful for folks who have had negative relationships with food in the past to cut out all animal products. I do know that for folks who may be on the side of environmentalism and cruelty-free diet living, that is also really great, and I honor those perspectives. But ultimately, for veganism, from a like nutrition standpoint, the issue is that you're not getting your vitamin B12 from the animal products that you would be typically eating, and B12 is necessary for proper neuronal function and brain health overall. So if you decide to switch to a plant-based diet, just make sure that you're supplementing vitamin B12 somewhere, either with like a capsule or sometimes they like fortify vegan milks with it too.
I'm vegan and I love it.
Awesome. Yeah, so I was vegan for I think 2 years, and I really liked it. Personally speaking, it really helped with my energy levels. It just made me more mindful about what I was putting into my body because I'd be checking labels more often. Sorry about the trade. And also just getting more creative in the kitchen, just like knowing that I had to cook a lot more for myself and then trying more foods that I wouldn't have normally tried. But for folks who realize that it's not sustainable for them, that's okay. We can all reduce the amount of meat that we eat in our diets, but it might not be an option for everybody to cut it out completely just yet.
It's really broadened my palate. Like I never liked mushrooms or tomatoes or avocados or a ton of things. I was the pickiest eater there ever was. In fact, my husband thought I should have a blog called The Picky Vegan or something like that. But now I love all these foods that I couldn't stand my whole life. So it's really interesting. And I've become quite the chef due to the pandemic. And my husband, one night at dinner, when I had like a French theme night with a French onion tart and a French apple tart for dessert, he said, "Where have you been all my life?" And we've been together for 35 years, so that was quite something.
I have a question and a comment, if you don't mind.
Yes, Holly.
This is Holly Goss. So I appreciate that you mentioned the thing about journaling. And I wanted to ask, I see there's mostly, if not all, women here, or well, a couple men, so sorry. So one thing I noticed is after going through menopause, that changed also in terms of not only my diet, but my metabolism. And one of the things, seriously, okay, was I started to keep a journal because I actually did gain like 10 pounds in a year, and without even realizing it, like totally not realizing it at all. And you know, do mostly, and I exercise a lot, and I do a lot of good things. Obviously, I must be eating extra food because it doesn't just happen. But I started keeping a journal, and so I appreciate that you mentioned that. And it really, really does help in terms of accountability. It just makes you more mindful of it. So kudos to you for that.